Hello, so good to have you here. If you enjoy exciting historical stories, leave a like and subscribe to the channel to follow every emotion of this romance. The rain in Chicago did not wash away sins. It only made the cobblestones slippery for those trying to outrun them. It was a torrential downpour, the kind that rattled window panes and drowned out the distant hum of the city, but Evelyn Moore could not feel the cold. She could not feel the water soaking through the thin soles of her shoes, or the dampness clinging to the hem of her modest wool coat. All she could feel was the terrified, frantic rhythm of her own heart battering against her ribs like a bird trapped in a cage. She stood before the heavy, iron-reinforced door of the Gilded Lily, the most notorious speakeasy on the north side. To the police, it was a vacant warehouse. To the city's elite, it was a sanctuary of jazz, gin, and excess. To Evelyn tonight, it was the mouth of hell. She raised a trembling hand and knocked. The sound was swallowed by the thunder rolling overhead. She knocked again, harder this time, desperation lending strength to her slender frame. A small slat slid open at eye level. A pair of suspicious dark eyes peered out, wreathed in cigarette smoke. "We're closed to the public, doll. Unless you got a password or a bottle in that purse, beat it," a gruff voice growled. "I am not here for a drink," Evelyn said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the terror that gripped her throat. "I am here for Dominic Rossi. Tell him Evelyn Moore is here. Tell him I am Julian's sister." The eyes narrowed. There was a pause, a heavy silence that seemed to stretch for an eternity, broken only by the relentless drumming of the rain. Then, the slat slammed shut. Evelyn held her breath, clutching her purse so tightly her knuckles turned white. Inside that purse wasn't a weapon, but a meager stack of crumpled dollar bills. Her life savings, everything she had earned teaching piano lessons to the tone-deaf children of the aristocracy. It wouldn't be enough. She knew it wouldn't be enough, but it was all she had. The heavy door groaned and swung inward. A mountain of a man in a pinstriped suit stood there, motioning her inside with a jerk of his head. "Boss is expecting someone." "Didn't think it'd be a girl," the man muttered as she stepped past him. The transition was jarring. One moment she was in the cold, grey misery of the storm. The next, she was assaulted by a sensory overload of warmth, golden light, and noise. Even though it was a weeknight, the club was alive. The air was thick with the sweet, cloying scent of expensive perfume mixed with the biting sharpness of cigar smoke and illegal bourbon. A jazz band was playing a frenetic, syncopated rhythm on a low stage, the saxophone wailing like a broken heart. Women in shimmering flapper dresses, their hair bobbed and lips painted a scandalous crimson, danced the Charleston with men in tuxedos who laughed too loud. It was a world Evelyn had only glimpsed from the periphery, a world of reckless abandonment that terrified her. She was a woman of structure, of sheet music and Sunday mass, of mending socks and counting pennies. This place was chaos. "This way," the guard said, cutting a path through the crowd. Evelyn kept her head down, avoiding the gaze of the patrons, fearing that if she looked too closely, she might see someone she knew, or worse, they might see her. She was led toward the back of the club, past the velvet curtains, and up a narrow private staircase that muffled the roar of the party below. At the top of the stairs, there was only one door. It was mahogany, polished to a shine with a brass handle that looked like gold. The guard knocked once, opened it, and stepped aside. "Go on," he said, his voice devoid of sympathy. Evelyn stepped inside, and the door clicked shut behind her, sealing her fate. The office was vast, lined with bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes that likely had never been read. A fire crackled in a large stone hearth, casting long, dancing shadows across the Persian rug. But Evelyn's eyes were drawn immediately to the center of the room. Tied to a heavy oak chair, his face a mask of bruises and blood, was Julian. "Julian!" Evelyn gasped, the sound torn from her throat. She rushed forward, falling to her knees beside him. His left eye was swollen shut and his lip was split, staining his white shirt with fresh crimson. "Evie," Julian mumbled through his swollen jaw, his one good eye widening in horror. "No, Evie, you shouldn't be here. Go away. Please, just go." "I'm not leaving you," she whispered, her hands hovering over his face, afraid to touch him and cause more pain. She turned her head, her eyes blazing with a mixture of fear and fury, searching for the monster responsible for this. Dominic Rossi stood by the window, his back to them. He was looking out at the rain-lashed street below. He was not what she expected. She had pictured a brute, a thug with broken knuckles and a cheap suit. But the man who turned to face her was impeccably dressed in a charcoal three-piece suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. He was tall, with jet-black hair slicked back, and a face that was devastatingly handsome, despite the sharp, dangerous edge to his features. A faint scar cut through his left eyebrow, a permanent reminder of the violence that defined his life. He held a crystal tumbler of amber liquid in one hand and a lit cigar in the other. He didn't look like a butcher. He looked like a king surveying his kingdom. "Miss Moore," Dominic said. His voice was a deep baritone, smooth as velvet but cold as the grave. "You have a lot of courage walking into the lion's den. Or perhaps it is just foolishness. It runs in the family, it seems." Evelyn stood up, smoothing her skirt, trying to summon every ounce of dignity she possessed. "Let him go, Mr. Rossi, please. He's just a boy." "He is 22 years old," Dominic countered, taking a slow sip of his drink. "Old enough to know that you do not cheat at my tables. Old enough to know the consequences of stealing from the Rossi family." "He didn't mean to." "He marked the cards," Dominic interrupted, his voice hardening. He walked slowly toward his desk, placing the glass down with a deliberate clink. "He insulted my intelligence and my hospitality. The debt he owes is not just money, Miss Moore. It is a debt of honor. And in my world, honor is paid for in blood." Evelyn reached into her purse and pulled out the envelope of cash. She slammed it onto the desk. "There is $300 there. It's everything I have. I can get more. I can work. I'll sell the piano. Just, please, don't kill him." Dominic looked at the envelope with an expression of mild amusement, bordering on pity. He didn't even reach for it. $300, he repeated dryly. "Your brother tried to walk away with 5,000. And the insult, that is priceless." He walked around the desk, moving with the predatory grace of a panther stalking a deer. He stopped just inches from her. Evelyn forced herself not to flinch, though the scent of him, tobacco, sandalwood, and danger was overwhelming. He towered over her, his dark eyes scanning her face, taking in the pale skin, the wide, terrified hazel eyes, the stray lock of chestnut hair that had escaped her hat. "I don't want your money, Evelyn," he said softly, using her first name with a familiarity that made her shiver. "I have more money than God. Look around you. Do you think $300 matters to me?" "Then what?" Evelyn's voice trembled. "What do you want? If you want blood, take mine. Let him go." Dominic laughed, a low, humorless sound. "A martyr. How noble. But I have no use for a dead piano teacher." He turned away, walking back to the fireplace, watching the flames lick at the logs. "You know, Miss Moore, I have a problem that money cannot solve. I have power. I have fear. I have the city in my pocket. But I do not have legitimacy." He turned back to her, his expression intense. "The mayor invites me to his parties because he fears me, not because he respects me. The society matrons clutch their pearls when I walk by. They see a gangster, an immigrant, a thug." Evelyn stared at him, confused. "What does this have to do with Julian?" "Everything," Dominic said. He took a step closer, his eyes locking onto hers. "I need to change the narrative. I need a bridge to that world. I need a symbol of respectability, someone untainted, someone with class, with grace, with a reputation that is spotless." He gestured to her, his hand sweeping down her modest attire. "You, the dutiful sister, the talented musician, the woman who walks into a gangster's office to save her foolish brother." Evelyn took a step back, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I don't understand." Dominic closed the distance between them. He reached out, his hand hovering near her face before he tucked that stray lock of hair behind her ear. His touch was electric, shocking her with its unexpected gentleness. "I am offering a trade, Evelyn. Your brother's life, his debt wiped clean. He walks out of here tonight, untouched. I will even give him enough money to leave the city and start over somewhere else away from the tables. And in return," she whispered, dread pooling in her stomach, "you want me to be your mistress?" Dominic's eyes flashed with sudden anger. "Do not insult me. If I wanted a whore, I could buy 1,000 of them downstairs. I do not want a woman to warm my bed for an hour. I want a partner." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper that sent chills down her spine. "I want a wife." The room spun. Evelyn grabbed the edge of the desk to steady herself. "A wife?" "A wife," Dominic confirmed, his gaze intense, burning into her. "I want a queen, Evelyn. Someone to stand beside me, to wear my diamonds, to host my dinners, to make the world look at Dominic Rossi and see a man of family, not a man of violence. You will marry me. You will live in my house. You will bear my name." "You want to buy me," she said, her voice barely audible. "I am making a demand," he corrected. A life for a life. Your freedom for his survival. He stepped back, giving her space, but his presence still filled the room. But know this. I do not want a prisoner. I want a wife who walks with her head held high. You will be treated with worship. You will want for nothing. You will be the queen of Chicago, but you will belong to me. Until death do us part. Evelyn looked at Julian. He was slumped in the chair, semi-conscious, a broken boy who had made a terrible mistake. If she said no, he would die. She knew it with absolute certainty. Dominic Rossi was not a man who made idle threats. He would kill Julian, and he would likely do it without blinking. But to marry him, to bind herself to a criminal, a man of violence, a man she barely knew, it was a death sentence of a different kind. It was the death of her dreams, the death of the quiet, normal life she had always wanted. She looked back at Dominic. He was waiting, his face unreadable, but there was a tension in his jaw, a hunger in his eyes that told her this mattered to him more than he was letting on. He didn't just want a trophy, he wanted her. He had seen something in her defiance, something that fascinated him. She took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of the fire and the man who was about to own her. She straightened her spine. She was a Moore. She would not cower. If I do this, Evelyn said, her voice ringing clear in the silent room, if I agree to this madness, Julian goes free now, tonight, and you never touch him again. You never let him near your gambling tables again. Done, Dominic said without hesitation. And she added, lifting her chin, meeting his dark gaze with a fire of her own, I will not be a bird in a cage, Mr. Rossi. If I am to be a queen, then I will have a voice. I will not be silent furniture in your mansion. A slow, genuine smile spread across Dominic's face. It transformed him, softening the harsh angles, making him look devastatingly human. I would expect nothing less, he said softly. That is why I chose you. He extended his hand toward her. It was a large hand, scarred but strong. An invitation, a contract, a shackle. Evelyn looked at his hand, then at her brother. She closed her eyes for a brief second, saying a silent goodbye to the girl she had been when she woke up this morning. That girl was gone. She opened her eyes and placed her small, pale hand into his. I accept, she said. Dominic's fingers closed around hers, warm and possessive. He lifted her hand to his lips, keeping his eyes on hers as he pressed a kiss to her knuckles. It was a gesture of old-world courtliness that felt strangely intimate. Then let us go, my queen, Dominic said, pulling her gently to his side as he signaled the guard to untie Julian. We have a wedding to plan. The back alley behind the Gilded Lily was a stark contrast to the opulence inside. It smelled of wet pavement, garbage, and the metallic tang of city exhaust. The rain was still falling, a relentless curtain of grey that blurred the streetlights of Chicago into hazy yellow orbs. Evelyn stood under the small awning of the rear exit, shivering not from the cold, but from the aftershocks of adrenaline. Beside her, two of Dominic's men were helping Julian into the back of a black sedan. Her brother looked small, broken, a shadow of the vibrant young man he had been just a day ago. His face was swollen, his movements sluggish. Dominic stood a few feet away, an imposing silhouette against the storm, holding a large black umbrella over Evelyn's head. He didn't touch her, but his presence was a wall of heat at her back. He was watching his men with hawk-like intensity, ensuring his orders were carried out to the letter. Where are you taking him? Evelyn asked, her voice barely audible over the drumming of the rain on the umbrella's silk canopy. To Union Station, Dominic replied, his tone clipped and efficient. He has a ticket on the midnight train to St. Louis. My associates there will set him up with a job at a legitimate factory. He will have a room, a wage, and a clean slate. If he stays away from the cards, he will live a long life. Evelyn moved toward the car, ignoring the mud splashing onto her stockings. She reached through the open window and took Julian's hand. It was cold and limp. Jules, she whispered, tears finally spilling over her lashes, mixing with the mist on her face. You have to go, you have to be good, promise me. Julian blinked, his good eye trying to focus on her. Evie, you're coming, right? Let's just go. Let's get out of here. I can't, she said, a sob catching in her throat. She squeezed his hand tight, trying to imprint the feel of him into her memory. I have to stay. I found a way to settle the debt, but I have to stay here to work it off. It was a lie, but a kind one. She couldn't tell him she had sold herself. The guilt would destroy him, or worse, he would try to stay and fight, and then they would both be dead. Work it off? Julian slurred, confusion clouding his gaze. He looked past her to Dominic, who stood like a sentinel in the shadows. Fear flickered in Julian's eyes. With him? Evie, no, he's the devil. He's a man of his word, Evelyn said firmly, though she was trying to convince herself as much as him. Go, Julian. Live your life. Don't look back. Do this for me. Dominic stepped forward then, his polished shoes crunching on the wet gravel. Time to go, he commanded. He nodded to the driver. Evie! Julian cried out as the engine roared to life. Goodbye, Julian, she whispered. The car pulled away, tires spinning briefly on the wet asphalt before finding traction. Evelyn watched the red taillights recede into the darkness, getting smaller and smaller until they were swallowed by the Chicago night. She stood there until they were gone, feeling as though a piece of her heart had been ripped out of her chest. She was truly alone now. Her parents were long dead, and her brother was exiled. There was no one left to protect her, except the wolf standing beside her. He is safe, Dominic said quietly. He shifted the umbrella so it shielded her more fully. You have my word. No one will touch him in St. Louis. Evelyn turned to look at him. In the dim light, his face was unreadable, carved from stone. And what happens to me now? Now, Dominic said, extending his arm for her to take. We go home. A second car, a gleaming Rolls-Royce Phantom, pulled up to the curb. The driver, a young man with a flat cap, hurried to open the rear door. Evelyn hesitated for a fraction of a second, the last moment of hesitation she would ever be allowed, and then stepped inside. The interior of the car was a different world. It was upholstered in soft cream leather that smelled of wealth. There was a crystal decanter of brandy built into the side panel, and a thick wool blanket folded on the seat. It was warm, quiet, and hermetically sealed from the grit of the city. Dominic slid in beside her, closing the door and shutting out the noise of the rain. The car pulled away smoothly, gliding over the bumps in the road as if it were floating. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Evelyn sat rigidly against the door, clutching her purse, staring out the window at the passing blur of buildings. They were heading north, away from the crowded tenements and the chaotic downtown, toward the Gold Coast, the neighborhood of old money, high walls, and lakefront mansions. You are shivering, Dominic observed. Before she could protest, he reached over and unfolded the wool blanket, draping it over her lap. His hands brushed her knees, sending a jolt of electricity through her nerves. She flinched, her body tense. Dominic pulled his hands back slowly, resting them on his own knees. I told you, Evelyn, I am not an animal. You do not need to flinch every time I move. I don't know you, she said, her voice tight. I know your reputation. They call you the Butcher of the North Side. They call me many things, he admitted, looking straight ahead. Some of them are true. Most are exaggerations designed to sell newspapers or keep rivals in line. Fear is a tool, Evelyn, just like a hammer or a wrench. If people fear you, they don't cross you. It keeps the peace. Is that how you intend to keep peace with me? She asked, turning to face him. Through fear. Dominic turned his head, and in the passing flash of a streetlight, she saw a flicker of something like pain in his dark eyes. No, I have enough enemies. I do not want an enemy in my own home. I want a partner. I want peace. He sighed, running a hand through his slicked-back hair, disrupting its perfection. I grew up in the gutter, Evelyn. My father was a drunk who beat us for sport. My mother scrubbed floors until her knees gave out. I fought for every scrap of bread, every dollar. Then the war came. I went to France. I saw things in the trenches that make the sins of Chicago look like a Sunday school picnic. He paused, his gaze distant. When I came back, I decided I would never be powerless again. I built this empire with my own hands, but it is lonely at the top of the mountain. I am surrounded by men who want my money, women who want my influence, and rivals who want my head. I have no one I can trust. And you think you can trust me? Evelyn asked, genuinely perplexed. You blackmailed me into this. I think, Dominic said, his voice dropping to a murmur, that a woman who walks unarmed into a gangster's den to save her brother has a spine of steel. I think you are loyal to a fault, and if I can earn that loyalty, then I will be the richest man in the world regardless of the money. Evelyn fell silent. It was a strange, twisted logic, but she couldn't deny the intensity behind it. He wasn't looking for a trophy. He was looking for an anchor. The car slowed and turned through a massive set of wrought iron gates. They drove up a long, winding driveway lined with ancient oak trees. At the end of the drive stood a mansion that looked more like a European castle than a house. It was built of grey stone, with turrets and tall arched windows glowing with warm light. This is it, Evelyn breathed. It was beautiful, but it was also imposing. A fortress. This is the Rossi estate, Dominic said, "It is yours now, as much as it is mine." The car stopped and the driver opened the door. Dominic got out first and offered his hand to help her down. As she stepped onto the gravel, the rain had stopped, leaving the air crisp and clean. The front doors of the mansion swung open, and a line of staff was waiting in the grand foyer. A butler in a tailcoat, a housekeeper with a stern face, and two maids in crisp uniforms stood at attention. Dominic led Evelyn up the stone steps and into the foyer. The space was breathtaking. A crystal chandelier the size of a small car hung from the vaulted ceiling. The floors were black and white marble, polished to a mirror shine. A grand double staircase swept up to the second floor. "Everyone," Dominic announced, his voice echoing in the vast hall. "This is Evelyn Moore. She is to be treated with the highest respect. Her word is law in this house. Is that understood?" "Yes, Mr. Rossi," the staff chorused in unison, though Evelyn caught the curious, shocked glances they exchanged. They had likely seen many women come and go, but never one introduced like this. "Mrs. Halloway," Dominic said, nodding to the stern housekeeper, "please show Miss Moore to the master suite. Prepare a bath for her. She has had a long night." "The master suite, sir?" Mrs. Halloway asked, her eyebrows raising slightly. "Not the guest wing?" "The master suite," Dominic repeated, his tone brokering no argument. "She's my fiancée. She stays with me." Evelyn felt the blood drain from her face, but she held her tongue in front of the servants. She followed Mrs. Halloway up the stairs, her legs feeling like lead. Dominic did not follow immediately. He turned into a side room, likely to pour himself another drink or issue orders to his guards. The master suite was larger than the entire apartment Evelyn had shared with Julian. It occupied the entire east wing of the house. There was a sitting room with a fireplace, a private balcony overlooking the lake, and a bedroom dominated by a massive four-poster bed draped in heavy velvet curtains. "The bathroom is through there, Mrs. Halloway said, pointing to a door. "I will have the maids bring up hot water and some fresh clothes. Mr. Rossi ordered a wardrobe for you earlier this evening." "He ordered a wardrobe?" Evelyn asked. "Mr. Rossi is a man who plans ahead," the housekeeper said dryly, then left the room, closing the door with a soft click. Evelyn stood in the center of the room, feeling overwhelmed. He had planned this. He knew she would say yes, or perhaps he knew he wouldn't give her a choice. She walked over to the French doors and looked out at the dark expanse of the grounds. She was a prisoner here, trapped in a gilded cage of silk and marble. But as she thought of Julian on the train, safe and heading toward a new life, she knew she would make the same choice 1,000 times over. The door handle turned and Evelyn spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. Dominic entered. He had removed his suit jacket and loosened his tie. He looked tired, the weight of the city pressing down on his shoulders. He stopped when he saw her standing there, defensive and alert. "Relax, Evelyn," he said softly. He walked over to a small table and poured a glass of water, drinking it down in one gulp. "I am not going to attack you." "You said we would share this suite," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "It is a suite," he corrected. "There are 2 bedrooms connected by the sitting room. You will sleep in there," he pointed to the main bedroom. "And I will sleep in the adjoining room. I will not touch you, Evelyn, not until you invite me to." He walked toward her, stopping a few feet away. The intensity of his gaze was disarming. "I want a marriage, not a rape. I want you to come to me because you want to, not because you have to." "That might be a very long wait, Mr. Rossi," she said defiantly. Dominic smiled, a slow, confident curve of his lips. "I am a patient man. And please call me Dominic." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He flipped it open. Inside sat a ring that made Evelyn gasp. It was a diamond, a massive emerald-cut stone flanked by sapphires, set in platinum. It glittered dangerously in the lamplight. "Give me your hand," he murmured. Hesitantly, she extended her left hand. He slid the ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. It felt heavy, like a shackle, but undeniably beautiful. "Welcome home, Evelyn," he whispered, lifting her hand to kiss the ring, sealing the pact. He turned and walked toward the adjoining door. "Sleep well. Tomorrow the dressmakers arrive. We have a busy week ahead." He disappeared into his room, closing the door between them. Evelyn was left alone in the silence of the giant house, the diamond weighing down her hand, the scent of his cologne lingering in the air. She sank onto the edge of the massive bed, the events of the night finally crashing down on her. She was the fiancée of Dominic Rossi. She was the queen of the underworld, and she had absolutely no idea how she was going to survive it. Sunlight did not trickle into the master suite of the Rossi estate. It poured in like molten gold, demanding attention. When Evelyn opened her eyes, for a fleeting, disoriented moment, she thought she had died and gone to heaven. The sheets beneath her were of a thread count she hadn't known existed, cool and impossibly smooth against her skin. The ceiling above was adorned with a fresco of cherubs and clouds, a stark contrast to the water-stained plaster she had stared at every morning for the last 5 years. Then the weight on her left hand pulled her back to earth. She lifted her hand. The diamond caught the morning light, fracturing it into 1,000 rainbows that danced across the wall. It wasn't a dream. Julian was gone. The rain-slicked alley, the smell of fear, the handshake that sealed her fate. It was all real. She was in the beast's lair, and she was wearing his collar. She sat up, clutching the silk sheet to her chest. The door to the adjoining room, Dominic's room, was closed. Silence hung heavy in the air, not the peaceful silence of solitude, but the pregnant silence of a house holding its breath. A sharp knock on the corridor door made her jump. Before she could answer, Mrs. Holloway swept in, followed by a procession of maids carrying trays, towels, and boxes. "Good morning, Miss Moore," the housekeeper said, her tone brisk and efficient, offering no room for grogginess. "It is 9 o'clock. Mr. Rossi expects you downstairs for breakfast in an hour. After that, the modiste will arrive." "The modiste?" Evelyn repeated, swinging her legs out of bed. Her feet sank into a plush Persian rug. "To create your trousseau," Mrs. Holloway explained as she opened the heavy velvet curtains, revealing a breathtaking view of Lake Michigan, its waters choppy and grey against the blue sky. Mr. Rossi was quite specific. "Your current wardrobe is insufficient for your new station." Evelyn felt a flush of shame heat her cheeks. Her clothes were clean and mended, but they were cheap wool and cotton, bought from discount bins and worn until they thinned. To these people, she must look like a beggar. "I can dress myself," Evelyn said as a maid moved to help her with her robe. "Nonsense," Mrs. Holloway said, though not unkindly. "You are to be the lady of the house. You do not lift a finger unless you wish to play the piano. Now the bath is drawn. Lavender and rose oil, it will help with the nerves." An hour later, scrubbed, scented, and dressed in a silk day gown that belonged to who knew whom, Evelyn descended the grand staircase. The house was even more imposing by day. It was a museum of dark wood, marble statues and oil paintings that watched her with judging eyes. She found Dominic in the sunroom at the back of the house. It was a glass-walled conservatory filled with ferns and exotic flowers. He sat at a round iron table reading the Chicago Tribune, a cup of black coffee steaming beside him. He looked different in the daylight, less like a phantom, more like a man. He wore a light grey suit, crisp and tailored, his dark hair gleaming. He didn't look up as she entered, but he spoke. "The eggs are likely cold. I told them to wait, but cook gets anxious." Evelyn pulled out her own chair, a small act of rebellion against the hovering footman, and sat down. "I'm not hungry." Dominic lowered the paper. His eyes, dark and piercing, scanned her face. "You look better. The shadows under your eyes are gone." "Makeup can hide a lot of things," she replied, pouring herself a cup of tea. Her hand shook slightly, the china rattling against the saucer. She steadied it with a force of will. "Where is Julian? Have you heard anything?" "He is on the train," Dominic said calmly. "He will reach St. Louis by this afternoon. I have already received a wire from the conductor confirming he is on board and behaving." Evelyn exhaled, a breath she felt she had been holding since last night. "Thank you." "Do not thank me for keeping my end of a bargain," Dominic said, folding the newspaper. "Now eat. You will need your strength. Madame Dubois is not a woman to be trifled with. She is the finest dressmaker in the city, and she is also a tyrant." "Why do I need new clothes?" Evelyn asked, gesturing to the silk gown she wore. "This is fine." Dominic leaned forward, his expression hardening. "Evelyn, listen to me. In this world, perception is reality. If you look like a victim, you will be treated like one. If you look like a mouse, the cats will eat you. I need you to look like a queen. I need you to wear armor. Silk and diamonds are the armor of women in our society. When you walk into a room on my arm, I want men to envy me and women to fear you." "Fear me," she scoffed. "I teach piano to 6-year-olds. I'm not scary." "You walked into my office and demanded a life," Dominic said quietly. "You have steel in you, Evelyn. Let the clothes reflect it." The session with Madame Dubois was an exercise in endurance. The woman was a whirlwind of measuring tapes, pins, and French expletives. She turned the library into a fitting room, draping Evelyn in fabrics that cost more than her father had made in a lifetime. Dominic stayed for the fitting. He sat in a leather armchair in the corner smoking a cigar, watching with a detached, critical eye. He didn't look at her with lust, but with the scrutiny of an investor examining a prize racehorse. "No," he said firmly when Madame Dubois pinned a flapper-style dress on Evelyn, the hemline scandalously high just below the knee. "Too common. Every girl in the jazz clubs wears that." "But, Monsieur Rossi, it is the fashion," Madame Dubois protested. "I do not care about fashion. I care about presence," Dominic said, ash flickering from his cigar. "She has a long neck and elegant shoulders. Show them. Put her in velvet. Deep colors. Emerald, sapphire, burgundy. Long lines. I want her to look like a statue come to life, not a girl looking for a dance partner." Evelyn stood on the podium feeling like a mannequin. "Do I get a say in this?" Dominic looked at her. "Do you know the difference between French silk and Italian silk? Do you know which cut commands respect from a senator's wife and which one invites a proposition from a bootlegger?" "No," she admitted. "Then trust me." They settled on a wardrobe that was breathtakingly sophisticated. It was less roaring 20s wildness and more Art Deco elegance. Sharp lines, heavy fabrics, intricate beading. When Evelyn finally looked in the full-length mirror, wearing a midnight blue velvet gown that clung to her curves and pooled on the floor, she didn't recognize herself. The girl from the tenement was gone. Staring back was a woman who looked dangerous. "Perfect," Dominic murmured, standing up. He walked over to her, standing behind her, so they were both framed in the mirror. He placed his hands on her shoulders. The contrast was striking. His dark power, her pale elegance. They looked like a portrait of the underworld royalty he so desperately wanted to be. "Tonight we dine at the Palmer House. It will be our first public appearance." "Tonight?" Evelyn panicked. "I'm not ready." "You are wearing that dress," he whispered, his breath stirring the hair at her nape. "You are ready." After the dressmakers left, the house fell silent again. Dominic retreated to his study to handle business. A euphemism Evelyn knew involved bootlegging routes and payoffs. Needing to escape the suffocating luxury of her suite, she wandered the halls. She found the ballroom in the west wing. It was a massive, dusty space with chandeliers covered in sheets clearly unused, but in the corner, uncovered and gleaming, stood a Steinway grand piano. It was like seeing an old friend. Evelyn approached it reverently. She sat on the bench, her fingers hovering over the keys. She hadn't played in 2 days, the longest she had gone without music in years. She began with a scale, testing the action. The tone was rich, mellow, and perfectly in tune. She closed her eyes and let her hands take over. She didn't choose a happy tune. She played Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor. Ideally, it required massive hands and power, but she played it with a ferocity that made up for her size. The opening chords crashed through the silence of the house, heavy, ominous, demanding. She poured everything into the music, her fear for Julian, her anger at Dominic, the mourning for her lost freedom. The music swelled, chaotic and frantic, before crashing down into the heavy, tolling bells of the finale. When the last chord faded, vibrating in the air, she sat with her head bowed, breathing hard. "I didn't know you played like that." Evelyn spun around. Dominic was leaning against the doorframe, his jacket off, his sleeves rolled up. He looked weary, but his eyes were fixed on her with a new expression. Not calculation, not ownership, fascination. "I told you I was a musician," she said defensively. "You said you taught piano that—" He gestured to the instrument. "That was not teaching, that was war." He walked across the ballroom, his footsteps echoing on the parquet floor. He stopped by the curve of the piano. "My mother bought this. She wanted me to learn. I had no patience for it. I preferred fighting in the streets. She would have liked to hear you play." Is she here?" Evelyn asked. "She died 10 years ago. Spanish flu," Dominic said, his voice devoid of emotion, though his hand unconsciously traced the wood of the piano lid. "She was the only good thing in my life, until now." The implication hung in the air. Evelyn looked down at her hands. "You don't know me, Dominic. You know a version of me you created in your head. Then show me," he challenged softly. "Play something else. Show me who you are." "I should get ready for dinner," she said, standing up abruptly. The intimacy of the moment was too much. It was easier to hate him when he was the monster in the office, not the man listening to Rachmaninoff with sadness in his eyes. "Evelyn," he said, stopping her as she moved past him. He didn't grab her, but his voice held her in place. "Tonight will be difficult. People will stare, they will whisper. Some will be rude." "I can handle rude," she said, lifting her chin. "I've worked in service. I've been invisible my whole life." "You are not invisible anymore," Dominic said grimly. You are the target now. Stay close to me. Do not speak to the police if they approach. Do not accept drinks from anyone but the waiter I designate. Do you understand? Is it really that dangerous? She asked, a fresh wave of cold washing over her. I am the king of this city, Evelyn, he said, his face hardening into the mask she had seen the night before. But kings are always being hunted. And now, you are the queen. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small pistol. It was pearl-handled, small enough to fit in a purse. He held it out to her. Evelyn stared at it in horror. I'm not taking that. Take it, he ordered. Put it in your clutch. I hope you never have to use it. But if someone corners you, if I am not there, you point it at their chest and you pull the trigger until it clicks. Do not hesitate. Evelyn looked at the gun, then at the man offering it. This was her dowry. Not linens and silver, but a pearl-handled pistol and a target on her back. She took the gun. It was heavy and cold. She slid it into the pocket of her dress. Good, Dominic said. Now go and dress. The car leaves in an hour. As Evelyn walked back up the grand staircase, the weight of the gun against her hip was a constant reminder. She wasn't just playing a part in a game of high society. She had been drafted into a war, and as she touched the cold metal, a terrifying thought crossed her mind. She might be safer with the gun than without it. The transformation was beginning, and she wasn't sure if she was becoming a queen or a soldier. The Rolls-Royce glided to a halt in front of the Palmer House Hotel, a beacon of light and excess in the heart of the loop. The rain from the previous night had been replaced by a biting wind off the lake, but inside the revolving doors, the air was warm and perfumed with expensive tobacco and hothouse flowers. Evelyn sat in the back of the car, her hands clutched tightly around her beaded evening bag. Inside, the weight of the pearl-handled pistol pressed against her thigh, a cold, hard reminder that she was no longer just Evelyn Moore, piano teacher. She was Mrs. Rossi-to-be. She was property. She was a target. Breathe, Dominic's voice came from the shadows beside her. He was adjusting his cufflinks, his tuxedo stark and sharp against the leather seats. He looked every inch the prince of the city, but his eyes were scanning the sidewalk, checking the faces of the doormen, the valets, the passers-by. If you look terrified, they will smell blood. You must look bored. Boredom is the ultimate sign of power. I'm not bored, Evelyn snapped, her nerves fraying. I'm nauseous. Swallow it, he commanded, though his tone was not unkind. Tonight is a test. Half the people in that room owe me money. The other half want to see me in jail. They are all waiting for me to make a mistake. Do not let them see you sweat. The driver opened the door. Dominic stepped out first, buttoning his jacket. He turned and extended a hand to her. Evelyn took a deep breath, smoothed the midnight blue velvet of her gown, and stepped out into the flash of a photographer's bulb. Mr. Rossi! Mr. Rossi, who is the lady? A newsboy shouted from the crowd. Dominic ignored him, his grip on Evelyn's hand firm as he led her up the stairs. His hand moved to the small of her back, a warm brand of possession that guided her through the gilded lobby. The hotel was a cathedral of commerce, with frescoed ceilings and marble pillars that stretched up to the heavens. It was crowded with the elite of Chicago, men in tails, women in furs, the air buzzing with the frenetic energy of the jazz age. As they approached the entrance to the Empire Room, the maitre d' froze. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second before he composed himself. Mr. Rossi, he said, bowing slightly too low, we didn't expect you this evening. I rarely announce my arrival, Henri, Dominic said smoothly, slipping a crisp $100 bill into the man's hand. I trust my usual table is available. For you, sir? Always. They were led through the crowded dining room. The conversation didn't just dip, it died. A wave of silence followed them as they walked, heads turning, forks pausing halfway to mouths. Evelyn felt hundreds of eyes crawling over her skin, judging her dress, her hair, the diamonds at her throat. She felt naked despite the heavy velvet. She fixed her eyes on Dominic's shoulder, using him as a shield against the glare. They were seated at a prime table in a semicircular booth that offered a view of the entire room but kept them protected from behind. A waiter appeared instantly with water and a bottle of champagne wrapped in a napkin. Prohibition was merely a suggestion in places like this. Smile, Dominic murmured as he unfolded his napkin. To your left, 3 tables down, that is Alderman Thorne. He campaigns on a platform of family values and prohibition. He is currently drinking gin from a teacup with his mistress. Evelyn risked a glance. The red-faced man caught her eye and quickly looked away, feigning interest in his menu. And over there, Dominic continued, nodding discreetly toward a table of loud men in pinstripes. "That is the O'Banion crew, rivals. They are smiling at us because we are in neutral territory. If we were on the street, they would be shooting." "Is there anyone here who isn't a criminal or a hypocrite?" Evelyn whispered, taking a sip of the champagne to steady her nerves. It was sharp and dry, biting at her tongue. "The orchestra," Dominic said, a faint smirk touching his lips. "They are just musicians trying to get paid, like you." The mention of her past life stung. "I'm not a musician anymore, apparently. I'm a show pony." "You are only a pony if you let them ride you," Dominic countered. "Be a thoroughbred." Their appetizers arrived, oysters, Rockefeller, but Evelyn had barely lifted her fork when a shadow fell over their table. "Well, well, Dominic Rossi? Leaving the slaughterhouse for the opera house, are we?" Evelyn looked up. Standing there was a man who dripped with old money arrogance. He was young, perhaps 30, with blonde hair slicked back and a face that was handsome but cruel. He swayed slightly, a martini glass in his hand. Dominic didn't stand. He didn't even stop buttering his bread. "Preston, I see you've started drinking your inheritance early tonight." "I drink to forget the company this city keeps these days," Preston sneered. He turned his watery blue eyes onto Evelyn. His gaze raked over her, insolent and degrading. "And who is this? Another little flapper you picked up from the gutter? How much did she cost, Rossi? Or do you pay by the hour?" The silence at the surrounding tables was deafening. Everyone was watching, waiting for the violence. Evelyn saw Dominic's hand still on the table. His knuckles didn't whiten, but the air around him dropped 10 degrees. He was about to kill this man. She could feel the violence coiling in his muscles, ready to spring. If he attacked a society heir in the Palmer house, it would be war. Police, headlines, chaos. It would destroy the legitimacy he was trying to build. Evelyn moved before he could. She set her fork down, with a deliberate clink that rang through the silence. She turned her gaze to Preston, channeling every ounce of the strict, no-nonsense demeanor she used on unruly piano students. "Mr. Preston, is it?" she asked, her voice clear, melodic, and dripping with ice. Preston blinked, surprised she could speak. My name is Evelyn Moore," she continued, holding his gaze with a ferocity that made him step back. "And while you are concerned with the cost of my company, I believe you should be more concerned with the cost of your own debts. My brother used to deal cards at the Red Velvet. He mentioned a Mr. Preston who owes $3,000 and cries when he loses." A ripple of shock went through the listeners. Preston's face turned a bright, blotchy crimson. "How dare you?" "I dare because I do not owe anyone anything," Evelyn interrupted, her voice rising just enough to carry to the nearby tables. "Whereas you, sir, seem to owe everyone. Mr. Rossi is enjoying his dinner. I suggest you return to yours before you embarrass your family further. Your father worked too hard to build a reputation for you to destroy it in a drunken stupor." It was a bluff. She didn't know if his father was hard-working or if he really cried when he lost, but she knew the type. Men like him were terrified of being exposed as frauds. Preston opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Dominic, who was watching Evelyn with an unreadable expression, and then turned on his heel and fled toward the bar. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then Dominic picked up his glass and took a sip. "Remind me never to play cards against you," he murmured. Evelyn let out a breath, her hands trembling beneath the tablecloth. "Was that too much?" Dominic turned to her. The look in his eyes was no longer just fascination. It was respect. Deep, genuine respect. "No, it was perfect. You didn't just defend yourself, you castrated him without spilling a drop of blood. That is power, Evelyn." He signaled the waiter. "Bring us the best bottle of red wine you have. We are celebrating." The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. The tension had broken, replaced by a strange camaraderie. They were co-conspirators now. Dominic told her stories about the people in the room, scandalous, funny, terrifying stories. He made her laugh, a genuine laugh that surprised her. For a moment she forgot he was a gangster. He was just a man with a sharp wit and a cynical view of the world, a view she was starting to share. When the band struck up a slow, melancholy waltz, Dominic stood and offered his hand. "Dance with me." "I don't know if I should." Evelyn hesitated. "Everyone is staring." "Let them stare," he said. "Let them see that you belong to me." She took his hand. He led her to the dance floor, pulling her into his arms. He held her close, closer than was strictly proper, but she didn't pull away. His hand on her waist was warm and solid. She could feel the heat of his body through his shirt, the steady beat of his heart. They moved together effortlessly. Evelyn was a musician. She felt the rhythm in her bones. Dominic moved with the natural grace of a fighter, fluid and balanced. "You were shaking," he whispered in her ear as they turned. "I was terrified," she admitted, looking up at him. Her face was inches from his. She could see the flecks of gold in his dark irises. "You didn't look it," he said. His hand tightened slightly on her waist. "You looked like a queen defending her court. I hate bullies," she whispered. "And he was a bully." "Yes," Dominic said, his voice dropping to a rumble. "But so am I, Evelyn. Don't forget that." "You're different," she said without thinking. Dominic stopped moving. They stood in the middle of the floor, the other couples swirling around them. "How?" "He is cruel because he thinks he is better than everyone," Evelyn said, searching his face. "You are cruel because you think everyone is out to get you. It's defensive." Dominic stared at her for a long moment, his expression vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen before. "Be careful, Evelyn. If you start understanding me, you might start forgiving me. And I do not deserve forgiveness." "Everyone deserves a chance at redemption," she said softly. The music swelled and he pulled her back into the dance, but the mood had shifted. The air between them was charged, thick with unspoken words and a rising tension that had nothing to do with fear. As they left the hotel an hour later, the wind was howling off the lake. Dominic wrapped his own tuxedo jacket around her shoulders, shielding her from the cold. They were waiting for the car when a screech of tires tore through the night. Dominic's reaction was instantaneous. He didn't look, he moved. He shoved Evelyn behind a concrete pillar, his body covering hers, pressing her into the stone. "Down!" he roared. A black sedan sped past. No shots were fired, just a shout, a jeer from the window, and a glass bottle thrown that shattered harmlessly on the sidewalk. It was a warning, a prank by the O'Banion boys. But in that split second, pressed against the pillar, Evelyn felt the reality of his world. She was crushed against his chest, his arms coaking her, his gun drawn in his hand. When had he drawn it? She hadn't even seen him move. He didn't pull away immediately. He stayed there, shielding her, his breathing heavy, scanning the street with wild, predatory eyes. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his voice rough. "No," she gasped, her hands clutching the lapels of his shirt. "Dominic." He looked down at her. The adrenaline was coursing through him, making his eyes black and dilated. He looked dangerous, lethal, and God help her. She felt safe. "I told you," he whispered, holstering the gun and stepping back, adjusting his disheveled tie with shaking hands. "Kings are always being hunted." He offered his hand to help her into the arriving car. "Let's go home." The drive back was silent, but it wasn't the awkward silence of the arrival. It was the silence of two people who had walked through fire together and come out the other side singed but standing. Evelyn touched the pearl handle of the pistol in her bag. She hadn't used it, but she understood now why she had it. And as she looked at Dominic's profile, stark against the passing streetlights, she realized with a jolt of terror that she wasn't just afraid for herself anymore. She was afraid for him. The cage was closing, but she was no longer sure she wanted to break out. She was starting to wonder how to protect the lion inside. The wedding was not a fairy tale. It was a coronation. 3 days had passed since the incident at the Palmer house. 3 days of frenetic activity that turned the silent, imposing Rossi estate into a hive of controlled chaos. Florists arrived by the truckload, filling the great hall with enough white gardenias and lilies to suffocate a man. Caterers argued in Italian and French in the kitchens. An orchestra set up in the ballroom, tuning their instruments until the air vibrated with anticipation. Evelyn stood in the center of her dressing room, a statue draped in silk. Madame Dubois was on her knees, her mouth full of pins, making final adjustments to the hem of the wedding gown. It was a masterpiece of the era, a sheath of ivory silk charmeuse that skimmed Evelyn's body like water, overlaid with intricate silver beading in geometric Art Deco patterns. It had no train, no bustle, no restrictive corset. It was modern, fluid, and breathtakingly expensive. "You look like a star of the silver screen," a voice said from the doorway. Evelyn turned, risking a pinprick, and a genuine smile broke through her mask of anxiety. Beatrice Calloway, Evelyn's best friend and the only person from her old life invited to the wedding, stood in the doorway. B was the epitome of a flapper. Short bobbed hair dyed a shocking black, kohl-rimmed eyes, and a dress that showed off her knees. She looked out of place in the grand, stuffy room, and yet she owned the space immediately. "Look at you," B whispered, walking forward and circling Evelyn. "Evelyn Moore, marrying Dominic Rossi. I thought you were joking when you called me." I thought you'd finally cracked from all those piano scales." "It happened fast," Evelyn said, her voice low. She signaled Madame Dubois to give them a moment. The dressmaker huffed but retreated. Once they were alone, Bee grabbed Evelyn's hands. Her grip was tight, her eyes searching. "Evie, tell me the truth. Are you in trouble? Did he force you?" "It's complicated, Bee," Evelyn said, looking away. "Julian was in trouble. Serious trouble. This fixes it." Bee's eyes widened. "Are you sold yourself? For Julian? That boy has been a millstone around your neck since your parents died, but this? Evie, this is the butcher we're talking about. People say he cements his enemies into the foundations of his buildings." "He's not like that," Evelyn said, surprising herself with the defense. "He's dangerous, yes, but he has a code, and he needs this marriage as much as I do. He wants respectability." "Respectability?" Bee let out a sharp laugh. "Honey, you can't wash blood out of a silk suit." "But," she sighed, squeezing Evelyn's hands, "if you're going to sell your soul, at least you got a good price. This house, my God, Evie, it's a palace. And have you seen him? I walked past him in the hall. He looks like Rudolph Valentino with a mean streak." "He's treating me well," Evelyn insisted. "He promised me I'd be safe, that I'd be a queen." "Then rule, darling," Bee said, adjusting the diamond bandeau in Evelyn's hair. "If you're going to be a gangster's wife, be the best damn gangster's wife Chicago has ever seen. Don't let them see you shake." A knock at the door interrupted them. It was Mrs. Halloway. "It is time, Miss Moore." The ceremony was held in the conservatory, under the glass roof where the setting sun painted the sky in bruises of purple and orange. It was a civil ceremony, officiated by a judge who looked nervous and sweated profusely despite the cool evening air. There were no pews filled with family. On one side stood Bee, clutching a handkerchief. On the other stood a dozen of Dominic's men, solemn in their dark suits, their hands clasped in front of them, likely concealing weapons. Dominic waited at the altar, a simple arch of white roses. He wore a black tuxedo with tails, a white gardenia in his lapel. When Evelyn entered, the string quartet began to play. It wasn't the traditional wedding march. It was a hauntingly beautiful arrangement of Debussy, something Dominic must have chosen knowing her taste. As she walked down the aisle, her legs felt heavy, but her head was high. "Don't let them see you shake." When she reached him, Dominic didn't smile. His face was solemn, his eyes dark and intense as they locked onto hers. He looked like a man making a pact with fate. He reached out and took her hand. His palm was warm and dry, his grip firm. "You look magnificent," he whispered so low only she could hear. The judge stammered through the service. When it came time for the vows, Dominic spoke clearly, his voice resonating in the glass room. "I, Dominic, take you, Evelyn, to be my wife, to have and to hold, from this day forward. I promise to protect you, to honor you, and to place the world at your feet, until death do us part." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. To place the world at your feet. It wasn't a standard vow. It was a promise of power. Evelyn's voice was quieter but steady. "I, Evelyn, take you, Dominic, to be my husband, to have and to hold. I promise to stand beside you, in the light and in the shadows, until death do us part." She saw a flicker of surprise in his eyes at the shadows part. She squeezed his hand. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the judge said, looking relieved to be finished. "You may kiss the bride." Dominic turned to her. He didn't grab her or dip her. He cupped her face gently with both hands, his thumbs tracing her cheekbones. He lowered his head slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. His lips brushed hers, soft, tentative at first, then firmer. It wasn't a kiss of overwhelming passion. It was a kiss of sealing a seal. It tasted of peppermint and tobacco. For a brief moment the room fell away, and there was only the warmth of his mouth and the strength of his hands holding her as if she were something precious and fragile. When they broke apart, there was a smattering of applause from the men and a tearful cheer from Bee. Dominic tucked Evelyn's hand into the crook of his arm. "Ready for the lions?" he asked quietly. "Ready," she breathed. The reception was a blur of excess. The ballroom doors were thrown open, and suddenly the house was filled with 200 guests. Politicians rubbed elbows with bootleggers. Opera singers drank champagne with union bosses. The air was thick with smoke, laughter, and the frenetic rhythm of a 12-piece jazz band playing the Charleston. Champagne flowed like water from a massive crystal fountain in the center of the room. Tables groaned under the weight of lobster, caviar, and roasted meats. It was a display of wealth so obscene it was almost mesmerizing. Evelyn stood by Dominic's side, shaking hand after hand. She met councilmen who leered at her, wives who assessed the cost of her jewelry with jealous eyes, and hard-faced men who looked at Dominic with a mixture of fear and reverence. She played her part perfectly. She smiled, she made polite conversation, she accepted compliments on the house she had only lived in for 3 days. "She's a natural boss," she heard one of Dominic's lieutenants, a scarred man named Luca, whisper to him. "Classy, real classy." "I know," Dominic replied, his eyes never leaving the crowd, watching for threats even in his own home. Midway through the evening, the band slowed the tempo. Dominic led her onto the floor for their first dance. As they moved, Evelyn noticed a man watching them from the edge of the crowd. He was older, with silver hair and a suit that looked expensive but worn. He wasn't drinking. He was just watching, his eyes cold and calculating. "Who is that?" Evelyn whispered, nodding almost imperceptibly. Dominic spun her, following her gaze. His jaw tightened. "That is Detective Callahan, the head of the Vice Squad. Did you invite him?" "I invite everyone who matters," Dominic said, "even the ones who want to hang me. Keep your friends close, Evelyn. And your enemies closer," she finished. "Exactly." He pulled her closer. "Callahan is dangerous because he is honest. You can't buy him. You can't scare him. He thinks I am a cancer on this city." "And what do you think you are?" she asked, looking up at him. Dominic looked down at her, his expression guarded. "I am the chemotherapy. The city is sick, Evelyn. Corruption, poverty, hypocrisy. I provide a service. I keep the order where the police cannot. But men like Callahan, they only see the law. They don't see the reality." The song ended, and before Evelyn could respond, Callahan began to walk toward them. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. "Mr. Rossi," Callahan said, his voice gravelly, "a lovely party, though I wonder how many statutes you're violating per square foot." "Detective," Dominic said, his voice cool and polite, "I am glad you could make it. Please, try the lobster. It was flown in fresh from Maine this morning." Callahan ignored the offer. He turned his gaze to Evelyn. It wasn't lecherous like Preston's had been. It was pitying. "And you must be the new Mrs. Rossi. You look like a nice girl." "A teacher, I heard." "That's right," Evelyn said, meeting his gaze. "A word of advice, Mrs. Rossi," Callahan said, stepping closer. "The gold on these walls, it tends to tarnish when the blood seeps through. Don't get too comfortable. Houses built on sand don't last. This house is built on stone, Detective," Evelyn said, her voice ringing clear. "And my husband is a businessman. If you have accusations, bring a warrant. If you want champagne, grab a glass. Otherwise, you are interrupting our dance." Dominic went rigid next to her. Callahan blinked, surprised by the steel in her voice. He let out a dry chuckle. "I see," Callahan said, tipping his hat. "You picked a fighter, Rossi. Shame. She'll make a beautiful widow." He turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Dominic exhaled slowly. "You have a habit of defending me against men who could destroy us." "He was rude," Evelyn said simply, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. "He was right," Dominic muttered, almost to himself. "But thank you." The party lasted until the early hours of the morning. By the time the last guest had stumbled out and the band had packed up, Evelyn's feet were throbbing and her head was spinning from the noise and the smoke. The house fell silent, save for the servants clearing away the debris of the celebration. Dominic led Evelyn up the grand staircase to the master suite. Inside, the room was dim, lit only by the embers in the fireplace. The maid had turned down the bed and left a bottle of chilled champagne on the table, along with 2 glasses. Evelyn stood in the middle of the room, feeling suddenly exposed. The adrenaline of the performance had faded, leaving only the reality of the wedding night. She was married. She was in his room. Dominic closed the door and locked it. The sound of the bolts sliding home echoed like a gunshot. He took off his jacket and tossed it onto a chair. He loosened his tie, undoing the top button of his shirt. He looked exhausted, the lines of his face deep in the firelight. He walked over to the table and poured 2 glasses of wine. He handed one to her. "To us," he said quietly. "To us," she echoed, taking a sip. He watched her for a moment, then set his glass down. "Turn around." Evelyn froze. "What?" "The dress," he said gently. "You cannot undo the buttons yourself. And the maids are gone." Evelyn turned slowly, presenting her back to him. She felt his fingers brush the nape of her neck, cool and rough against her heated skin. He began to undo the tiny pearl buttons that ran down her spine. His touch was clinical, careful not to graze her skin more than necessary, but the intimacy was overwhelming. One by one, the buttons came undone. The dress loosened. Evelyn held her breath, clutching the glass of champagne. "There," he said when he reached the small of her back. His hands lingered for a second, hovering just above her skin, as if he wanted to touch her, but was restraining himself. Then he stepped back. Evelyn turned around, clutching the bodice of the dress to her chest. Dominic was standing by the fireplace, looking at her. The hunger was there in his eyes, raw and undeniable. He wanted her. She could see the desire tensioning every muscle in his body. "Dominic," she whispered. He closed his eyes for a brief second and took a deep breath. When he opened them, the hunger was masked by a steely resolve. "Go to sleep, Evelyn," he said, his voice rough. "You are tired. It has been a long day." You're not staying?" she asked, confused. It was their wedding night. She had prepared herself. She had expected something. "I told you," Dominic said, walking toward the connecting door to his room. "I am not an animal, and you are not ready. I saw your face when Callahan spoke to you. You are brave, but you are still afraid. I do not want fear in my bed." He stopped at the door, his hand on the knob. He looked back at her, and his expression softened into something almost sad. "I will wait until you stop looking at the door like it is an escape route. Sleep well, my queen." He opened the door and went into his room, closing it firmly behind him. Evelyn stood alone in the firelight, the silk dress pooling around her feet. She looked at the locked door to the hallway, then at the closed door to Dominic's room. She walked over to the vanity and set down the champagne glass. She unpinned the diamond bandeau from her hair. As she looked at herself in the mirror, she saw the reflection of the woman who had stared down a police detective and married a crime lord. She walked over to the nightstand and opened the drawer. The pearl-handled pistol was there, resting on a Bible. She closed the drawer. She walked to the connecting door, Dominic's door. She placed her hand on the wood, feeling the warmth radiating from the other side. He had kept his word. He had given her power, safety, and respect. And tonight, he had given her the greatest gift of all, autonomy. She turned off the lamp and climbed into the massive bed, pulling the heavy duvet up to her chin. For the first time since she had walked into the Gilded Lily, she didn't feel like a prisoner. She felt like a wife waiting to fall in love, and that terrified her more than any gun. Weeks turned into a month, and the Rossi estate settled into a rhythm that was as seductive as it was suffocating. Evelyn learned that being the queen of Chicago's underworld was a full-time job. Her days were filled with fittings, flower arrangements, and learning the intricate, unwritten laws of the hierarchy she now sat atop. She learned which politicians preferred whiskey and which preferred boys. She learned how to spot a concealed weapon in a tailored suit, and she learned that silence was often the loudest weapon in the room. But the nights were the hardest. Every night, Dominic would escort her to her room. He would kiss her hand, his lips lingering against her skin for a moment longer than necessary, his dark eyes burning with a fire he refused to let consume him. And every night he would walk through the connecting door and lock it from his side. It was a torture of his own design. He was waiting for her to come to him, to knock on that door. But Evelyn, paralyzed by the ghost of their transactional beginning, could not bring herself to turn the handle. She told herself it was pride. In reality, it was fear, not of him, but of how completely she might lose herself if she let him in. The tension came to a head on the night of the mayor's charity gala at the Art Institute. It was the most prestigious event of the season, a masquerade ball where the masks did little to hide the sins of the wearers. Evelyn wore a gown of liquid silver, backless and daring, with a matching feathered mask that obscured her eyes but highlighted the crimson of her lips. Dominic was in black, a phantom in a tuxedo, his mask a simple black domino that made him look like a highwayman from a romance novel. As they walked through the marble halls of the museum, surrounded by impressionist paintings and people who pretended to understand them, Evelyn felt the familiar weight of judgment. "They are staring," she whispered, tightening her grip on Dominic's arm. "Let them," Dominic replied, his voice a low rumble near her ear. "They stare at the lions in the zoo, too, but they don't dare open the cage." He left her briefly to speak with a judge who was having trouble with a verdict Dominic needed changed. Evelyn, needing a moment of respite from the smoke and the noise, retreated to the ladies' powder room. Inside, the air was thick with perfume and malice. 3 women stood by the mirrors, touching up their lipstick. Evelyn recognized them immediately, the wives of the banking and railroad tycoons. The old money who looked at the new money of the bootleggers as if it was sewage. They went silent when Evelyn entered. She moved to a basin to wash her hands, feeling their eyes on her back. "It's amazing what passes for society these days." One of them, a woman named Mrs. van der Hoven, said loudly to her reflection, My husband says the Rossi money smells like gunpowder and cheap perfume, another tittered. I heard she was a piano teacher, probably played in brothels. Evelyn's hands froze under the water. She turned off the tap slowly. She dried her hands on a linen towel, taking her time. The fear she used to feel, the trembling, mouse-like fear of Evelyn Moore, was gone. In its place was the cold, calculating rage of Evelyn Rossi. She turned to face them. She didn't shout, she didn't scream. She simply removed her mask, letting it drop to the tiled floor with a soft clatter. "Mrs. van der Hoven," Evelyn said, her voice echoing in the tiled room. "Your husband's bank launders 40% of that gunpowder money every Tuesday morning. If you'd like, I can have Dominic pull his accounts tomorrow. I imagine the bank run would be inconvenient for your social calendar." The woman paled, her lipstick tube slipping from her fingers. Evelyn turned to the second woman. "And you? Your son owes the Gilded Lily $5,000. Dominic was going to forgive it as a wedding kindness. I'll remind him not to." She walked toward the door, stopping just as she reached the handle. She looked back at them, her green eyes blazing. "My perfume is Chanel, by the way. And I didn't play in brothels. But I'm learning that the whores in this city have far more manners than the wives." She walked out, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. She found Dominic on the terrace, smoking a cigarette under the moonlight. He saw her approach, saw the flush on her cheeks and the fire in her eyes. "What happened?" he asked, flicking the cigarette away. "Nothing," Evelyn said, breathless. I realized I don't care what they think anymore." Dominic studied her, a slow smile spreading across his face. "You look dangerous, Evelyn. I like it. Take me home," she said impulsively. "Please. I can't stand these people another second." "As you wish." The drive back to the estate was quiet, but the air in the back of the Rolls-Royce was electric. The barrier between them felt thinner than ever. Evelyn watched the streetlights flicker past, her mind racing. She wanted him to touch her. She wanted him to break his own rule. They were passing through a wooded stretch of road, a mile from the estate gates, when the world exploded. A fallen tree blocked the road around a sharp bend. The driver slammed on the brakes, the heavy car skidding on the wet asphalt. Before the car even came to a full stop, the night was torn apart by the staccato bark of Thompson submachine guns. "Get down!" Dominic roared. He didn't wait for her to react. He threw himself over her, forcing her body down onto the floorboard, covering her with his own. The glass of the windows shattered, raining diamonds down on his back. Bullets pinged off the reinforced steel of the doors like hail. Evelyn screamed, the sound lost in the roar of the attack. She could smell the leather of the seats, the metallic scent of fear, and the sandalwood of Dominic's cologne. He was a heavy, solid weight on top of her, a human shield. "Stay down," he shouted to the driver. "Reverse! Get us out of here!" The driver, a veteran of the Great War, threw the car into reverse. The engine whined in protest as he floored it, the tires screaming as they found traction. They spun around, scraping against the guardrail, and sped back the way they came, leaving the ambushes in the dust. They drove in silence for a mile, the wind rushing through the broken windows. "Are you hit?" Dominic demanded, pulling back to look at her. His hands were frantic, patting down her arms, her ribs. "Evelyn, answer me." I'm fine," she gasped, shaking uncontrollably. She looked at him. There was a cut on his cheek from the flying glass, bleeding sluggishly. "So you're bleeding?" "It's nothing," he said, wiping the blood away with the back of his hand. His eyes were wild, terrified, not for himself, but for her. "I should have known. I got careless. I let you be seen." When they reached the estate, the guards were already swarming. Dominic didn't wait for the car to stop completely. He kicked the door open and pulled Evelyn out, carrying her up the front steps as if she weighed nothing. "Lock down the grounds," he barked at Luca. "Find out who it was." "Oh, Banyan, Moran, I don't care. I want them dead by sunrise." He carried her straight up the stairs, kicking open the door to the master suite. He set her down on the edge of the bed, his chest heaving. "Check yourself," he ordered, pacing the room, running a hand through his hair. "Make sure there is no glass." Evelyn stood up, her legs trembling. She wasn't hurt, but seeing him like this, unraveled, furious, terrified, broke something inside her. The dam she had built to keep him out finally crumbled. "Dominic," she said softly. He stopped pacing and looked at her. "I am sorry. I promised you safety. I lied." "You saved my life," she said, taking a step toward him. "I put you in danger in the first place," he shouted, slamming his hand against the wall. "You should have left. You should have taken the money and run." "I didn't want to run," she whispered. She closed the distance between them. He stood frozen, watching her. She reached out and touched the cut on his cheek. His skin was hot. "You are bleeding," she repeated. "Evelyn," he warned, his voice ragged. "Do not touch me right now. The adrenaline. I am not myself. I cannot promise to be gentle." "I don't want you to be gentle," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I want you to be my husband." She took his hand, the hand that had killed men, the hand that had built an empire, the hand that had shielded her from bullets, and placed it on her waist. "The door is unlocked, Dominic," she whispered, looking up into his dark eyes. "I'm opening it." Something in him snapped. The restraint he had held onto for weeks, the iron control of the King of Chicago, shattered. He groaned, a low, primal sound, and pulled her into him. His mouth crashed onto hers, not with the tentative respect of the wedding, but with a starving, desperate hunger. He kissed her, as if she were the air, and he was drowning. Evelyn met him, force for force. She wrapped her arms around his neck, tangling her fingers in his hair, pulling him closer. The fear was gone. The hesitation was gone. There was only the fire, the survival, and the undeniable, terrifying realization that she loved this dangerous, broken man. He swept her up into his arms again, carrying her toward the bed. The silk of her dress tore as his impatient hands sought her skin, but she didn't care. The pearls scattered on the floor, mixing with the shards of glass from the car, a perfect metaphor for their life. Beautiful, broken, and sharp. "You are mine," he growled against her throat, his voice possessing her soul. "You never leave. You never run." "I'm here," she promised, arching into his touch. "I'm right here." Outside, the guards patrolled with Tommy guns, and the city held its breath. But inside the room, the war was forgotten. There was only the storm of two people finding shelter in each other, binding themselves together with sweat and blood, and a love that was as dangerous as the bullets that had missed them. The Gilded Cage was no longer a prison. It was a fortress. And tonight, the king and queen were finally ruling it together. True love is rarely found in perfection. It is often forged in the fires of adversity and shared survival. Evelyn and Dominic's story teaches us that we cannot judge a person solely by their reputation or their past. Redemption is possible when someone believes in you, and true strength comes not from dominance, but from the willingness to protect and be vulnerable with your partner. In a world of masks and superficial judgments, the only thing that truly matters is the loyalty and connection between two souls who choose each other against all odds.